Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder three. Strange things that happen here. How stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?
Coffee. Without it, we would never have had the Industrial Revolution. We'd all be still living in Europe in mud huts. Here in Laredo, we have the Organic Man Coffee Trike. 4501 McPherson, the best coffee on the planet. If you can't get to Laredo, you can order from the organicmancoffeetrike.shop.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. Tonight with me is Christopher Paul Garetano. He was born in New York and is a graduate of the School of Visual Arts with a BFA in film. Chris is a creator and director of the award-winning docudrama Montauk Chronicles from 2015. He's the co-creator, executive producer, and co-host of the History Channel's The Dark Files. In 2019, Chris created, executive produced, and hosted his 8-episode investigative series, Strange World, for the Travel Channel and Discovery Channels. He has developed several new TV programs, writing a book of short horror science fiction stories, and filming his independent science fiction motion picture, In Ink, by Andromeda the Great. His podcast, Off to the Witch, debuted in the fall of 2020, right in the middle of the Black Plague, as well as his first graphic novel, South Texas Blues. And hopefully we'll get to talk about all of these things. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
When and where did you develop an interest in the odd things going on around us?
Oh, I was a little kid, and I would say, late afternoon reruns of Leonard Nimoy's In Search Of playing on the TV, going to book fairs, and I still have every book I collected since I was a kid, or at least the ones I salvaged, most of them, about the supernatural, about things that were strange. I felt that they were real, because I grew up, my parents owned a video store and they would take us to drive-ins, and I would get to see just about every movie, with very little discretion. I think they were open to the kids getting to see film. So when I saw the Amityville Horror and movies like that, I knew that house was only 15 minutes from my house in New York where I grew up. And so the idea of these supernatural portrayals in motion pictures and on television, the fact that they were real really sparked my imagination. So all of it started there, and that was during my formative years. So I watched a couple of behind-the-scenes documentaries that came out at the time as separate VHS tapes, one of which was a documentary called Scream Greats. It was about makeup effects artist Tom Savini, and also I saw behind the scenes the making of Michael Jackson's Thriller. So all of that, came together. The werewolf makeup by Rick Baker and all of the films I was watching, and all of the programs on the supernatural and books. And that's my answer. That's where it all started, and it hasn't stopped since. There was never a break from this.
Wow. About what time did you first get introduced to the Montauk Project and Camp Hero?
So that was much later. I think I was aware of the stories from the very first book that Preston Nichols put out in the 90s, and I was in high school and college. And I didn't think too much of it. I was like, okay, this is interesting. But I think the language of it and the way it was portrayed seemed a little questionable at the time, only because the edges that I later found, and I'll tell you what those are defined, weren't included. This seemed more like a like a mishmash of ideas from everything from The Outer Limits to The Twilight Zone to Star Trek were all mixed in this little tiny book. And no offense to anybody, but I think it was abridged completely. I know it was after many years of looking into this. So I a few years later, it was after film school, I wanted to make a documentary about the North American Sasquatch. I still do. I'm still planning on this. Something really unique, something that nobody's done. And a friend of mine was like, well, what you plan to do with the creatures and everything in here is going to cost you a lot of money. And so why don't you just make it about one of your local legends, one that no one really ever made a documentary about, which is Montauk. I said, yeah, I know about that. But I don't know, man. I mean, if I'm going to need equally the same amount of money to portray those things on screen. But then it occurred to me that these were real people, and Preston Nichols and Al Bielek and Duncan Cameron were real people, and I can go and speak to them and make a documentary portrayal, a character study on some of them elderly gentlemen who were telling this extraordinary tale. And that's where I began, and everything evolved from there. I wanted to start with a clean slate because these men claim it was true, so nobody had a copyright on the story. When someone's telling a true tale, you can't copyright it. Anyone can cover it, anyone can look into it, and anyone can investigate, and anyone should be able to. So that's how I approached it. Clean, my perspective, clean slate. And that's where it all began for the Montauk Tales for me. And then it was almost 2 decades after that.
How did you get started? What were the first couple of steps you had to take?
Well, in those days, it was about 05, 06, and the internet was not what it is now in terms of its rapid fire speed, in terms of its connectivity, accessibility to people. But at that time, I did get in touch with Preston Nichols, and I did get in touch with Al Bielek, and it started there. I was an admirer of documentaries of Werner Herzog, and he would bounce between making, narrative, cinematic motion pictures, always taking chances. I would say a pretty brave guy on some of the things he pulled off. I mean, people were in La Soufriere, people were leaving a volcano about to explode, and he's going at it. He wants to go and shoot it. And so I was charged by him. So I was like, how could this be my volcano? I want to go to the old man's house. I want to hear what he has to say, respectively. I'm not going to make fun of him. I want to hear what this man has to say. And I contacted these people. We scheduled. I tried to, I was working various jobs at the time. I wasn't making money with my profession like I am now. And, I was able to scrape enough money together to fly to Alfred Bielek and interview him. And then same with Preston Nichols, would drive upstate New York to this Catskills area and go to his home. And it's such a discovery, especially because now I know the difference. I've been on million plus productions where you have several people telling you what to do and trying to set up the day and schedule. And when you're out as an independent movie maker, you have freedom to capture what you want. You're also learning. It's a learning process, I think, that takes a lifetime. And so the best is to keep your eyes peeled for things that are unique, a moment that's unique, a texture in the home. And I wanted to get it all at that time, and that's how I approach things now. I look at the place, I try to visit it beforehand, and in that case, I visited, I spoke to this gentleman, and I was given, as in terms of a movie maker, I was given gold by these gentlemen because they were such characters, and there was something authentic about each of them. They each had their own very unique personality and stories to offer. And so I was inspired by those stories, whether they were true or not. And at the time, I didn't really believe too much of it, but I was open to. And it wasn't until later that I discovered there were government programs that were tantamount to the alleged Montauk Project. It hasn't been proven yet. And that made me believe that there were associative programs going on and opened my mind to that idea for sure.
Incredible. The trouble I always run into anytime I'm dealing with the Montauk Project is time travel. Because when does it start? When does it end? Because a lot of what Al Bielek was talking about, where he went way in the future and he went back and forth and he had to go back to the Eldridge and destroy the electrical system. If you try to follow it in the chronological order, well, it's not going to happen because it's going forward, it's going back, it's going forward again. Very confusing. Did you run into that problem, or did you just go straight ahead with how it came out?
I had a lot of problems with the things they said, but I've also since then had a lot of time to think about it and do some research. So consider this, that perhaps if it did exist, and I wanted to tell a story that Lee Spiegel, originally of Huffington Post Weird News, told me that made some sense to me. And then I thought about it, and the question could be, is it time travel? Or if we apply this to quantum sciences, could it be that with the infinite existences and infinite dimensions that might exist or do exist, could we be jumping through dimensions? Is there a technology that would allow us to, let's say, travel back in time to an alternate version of what happened that almost is closely, almost identical, but is not the same occurrence in time? And I wouldn't know where to start with that technology. You have to use your imagination, but it seems, as you know, it seems like anything we can imagine, we can create. I mean, all right, this is going to be a weird example. Okay, you have this character that was created, Universal Pictures, what was this, the 60s, Creature from the Black Lagoon. All right.
Something around back there.
Okay, so that's a fictitious character. Perhaps there's something out there. I mean, we've heard about in cryptozoology that there might be something close to it, and maybe there's something out there in the Amazon. But now that we've imagined this thing, this archetype or this creature, through science, one day, if you can't do it now, one day you'll be able to make a hybrid creature that would probably be identical to that fictitious creature that was created for a monster movie in the 60s. So, in other words, if you think about that concept and apply it to everything we've invented, from space shuttles to modern vehicles to computers, medical science, it seems like we can accomplish anything. It seems like anything could be accomplished, and perhaps has already been accomplished. In this case, in the Montauk case, they said, the gentlemen, and a lot of them have passed on now, that this was all derived from extraterrestrial intelligence and their technology. And again, at first I'm like, well, I saw all of this in movies. But living through what we did in the last 3 years and the many years I've had to examine this situation and then compare it to things that have been proven, part of me feels like anything goes. It really does.
How were you able to track down Preston Nichols and Al Bielek? You just look them up in the phone book, or did you have to contact somebody that put you in touch with them?
Going back that far, and again, this was 05, 06 when I started to do the research, I believe I found an early website for Preston called the Wingmakers, and he was accessible through that. Now, he, even up until his death, kept very limited contact, but I did achieve his phone number. And I think back then, and again, we're going back quite a bit, nearly 20 years, I think back then I may have gotten in contact with one of his colleagues, and then it progressed from there. Because I had I guess it was a fanzine. I published it. It was a magazine I created only a year or so out of film school. It was about motion pictures. But I was able to score some really good interviews with people, everybody from, at the time, Bruce Dickinson from Iron Maiden, to Todd McFarlane, the toy maker and great comic book artist, to Rob Zombie. At the time he had a lot of attention even then. So I had a good way of reaching out, and if I couldn't get direct to them at first, I would try to work through people that may be working with them and see what kind of response I would get. So I had a leg up in that sense. I was already contacting people.
Then did one of them put you in contact with Stuart Swedlow?
Yes, I think, and again, some of these people back then had an internet presence. And so I'm trying to think if it was Preston that put me in touch with Stewart, or it was just through the same method during the research period or the development period of the documentary. And again, was a very independent documentary, so there was no production team. You know, I had a friend at the time that was working with me to contact people and arrange things on the first version, and on the second, it was mainly me. And then I had a good crew of people here and there. I made the movie twice. The one that you saw was the one that I remade, and the only thing that was really retained was Alfred Bielik's interview, because he had passed away in 2011. The original version, I felt I wasn't there yet as a movie maker, and I wanted to push further and achieve better, and so I literally remade the whole thing. Yeah, it was rough. It was a rough decision, but it was a good decision. I'm happy I did it.
The movie took you, what, 10 years to make? Was that the first one, or the first one and the remake together?
Collectively, both versions took about 10 years, because I was working on other things as well. Pardon me for one second.
That's the problem when you speak a lot. Mouth, your throat gets dry. Did you find evidence as you were going? More and more evidence the more you dug into it. Did it go from, this sounds like a fantastic story, to, holy cow, this must have really happened?
I guess I was approaching it the way a psychiatrist would a patient, where they take a lot of time. They listen for a while. And I think the first Montauk movie was me listening. I really wanted to listen. As a movie maker, I was excited to put my own interpretation on their stories. So the very first thing that I did was to go and capture documentary style the interviews. And then as I started to hear the stories, I was thinking, as an artist, as a movie maker, how I'm going to interpret this, how I'm going to, stylistically create this for a palatable situation. You know, they're talking about children being beaten to death and murdered during the mind control experiments. So I needed to find a way where it wasn't completely off-putting at that time, because, I mean, like right now, there's a documentary on Netflix. I think it's incredibly well made, but it's terrifying in the sense where it's just bringing you deep into the darkness. This Jeffrey Dahmer series, oh boy. And so, but back then there was nothing like that on television, and not many documentaries like that when I was making Montauk Chronicles. And I wanted to make something that had impact, but at the same time, where my head was at, I wanted to give it style too. So that's how I was always thinking. And, I'm sure it would be slightly different if I remade it today.
From what I understand, if you were to go to Montauk today and try and film, you'd have to chase all the tourists out of your way.
Well, Stranger Things brought so many people to that place, because now you have this, this TV show that became a phenomena, and has completely, it's all over the world. So there's people traveling from all over the world to see the place, which I think they were already doing, for one reason, because it's accessible. If you imagine all of the other bases that have been talked about and speculated in story and conspiracy and ufology, they're top secret. You can't access them. You can get to maybe gates on the outskirts of the property, but Montauk, you can get to the property, and in a lot of cases, if you know people, they can bring you inside. There's a gentleman, that young guy, passed away unfortunately last week, or the week before, and his name is Paul Fagan. He was the first one to take me to the base. He was a local. He grew up there, and roamed around that base and examined that base for most of his life. It was his obsession. And, thankfully to Paul, I was able to get into the tower, the Sage Radar Tower, the main one that everyone sees, and everything that inspired, me to make the documentary. And of course, Stranger Things was inspired by this same thing.
Yeah, I just have to put this in here. I had the name Strange Things 2 months before the TV show came out.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
it's confusing me with it. They're like, oh, you're with Stranger Things. It's like, no, it's Strange Things.
Same. Yeah. I mean, people, sometimes people forget that my documentary is made well before Stranger Things was even an idea in their head, but I think it's a good thing because what Stranger Things did, and it's a good show, but what it did was it brought into the consciousness of people uh, to be interested in this. Now, for me, if there were these atrocities being committed underneath that base, and I believe there were, and I have reason to believe, uh, that I think this fictitious show, this show that it's a riff on a lot of 80s movies and of course the Montauk stories, uh, brings attention to that. And then people get concerned about these things because I've never wanted to believe this, but I believe it for good reason. And unfortunately, these are some of the people who have the powers that be. These are the powers that be have done things like this. And I think that's most terrifying. And some of that, even if it's in different ways, has come to the surface in the last couple of years. There's a battle going on right now, and I think a lot of the people or the types that had financed programs like this are part of this battle for sure.
In the video, you managed to get inside Camp Hero. Did you go in just once or a couple of times?
Well, going in there for a full day on the interior for Montauk Chronicles was enough, in my opinion. Traveling through that base, looking at all of the equipment that was left behind. And I wasn't just in the Sage radar tower, but that was interesting. And looking for some kind of underground entrance. I was interested in that. I remember this is going way back, searching, looking to see if there was any access. Now, the story that these gentlemen told was that they further west, which was somewhat middle of Long Island between New York City and Montauk, there's a Brookhaven Labs. And so Al Bielek, Preston Nichols said that they traveled from Brookhaven Labs underground on a train that would levitate on the rails that would go from there to Montauk secretly. In other words, so anybody working topside on a very lax military operation, meaning people were just hanging out on the days that there was actually military at that base, they wouldn't know what's going on beneath the ground. Now, there's quite a few contradictions, especially in that story that was written in the first book, and I can tell you what they were, and none of them make sense. It seems like a lot of it was just fabricated for the book. For instance, Al Bielek and Preston Nichols have since, and especially telling me, and it's in my film, that they would travel between Brookhaven Labs underground and the Montauk Lab, which the Montauk base, as you can go to right now, has, 400 and something acres, and you have this Sage radar tower, semi-automatic ground environment radar tower, at pretty much on a giant cliff overlooking the Atlantic Ocean, which is called Montauk Point. And then you have different sections of what used to be the base. A lot of them have crumbled or have been knocked down throughout the property. And it's a rather large area. And then you have bunkers, a lot of them cemented. Their original entrances for 16-inch guns, those big cannons that would defend the coast, are all cemented shut. All of that stuff you can see, you can examine. When Al Bielek said he traveled from Brookhaven Labs underground to a facility that should have been unbeknownst to anybody that would have been in any of the structures I just mentioned. So the structure that is said that was in the Montauk Project is underneath. When I made the Dark Files for History Channel, I finally had an opportunity because it had a budget, and we hired geophysicists to come to the grounds and look underneath the ground with something called electric resistivity imagery, which we were restricted from going past the fence that surrounds the perimeter of or at least a semicircle, because there's a cliff behind it pretty much, the perimeter of the radar tower. We couldn't go past it. because they had their eyes on us. But what we did do is get as close to the fence as possible. And what was read through the geophysicists was a vertical slice of information that proved that day that there was a huge underground structure that was not on record, any official record that we've looked at, that completely contradicts ideas of storage facilities or anything that you may suspect, oh, this is what it was. No, the geophysicists said this is the ceiling is already 15 to 20 feet down, and then from the ceiling of this structure, and we only saw a little vertical slice of it, was another 30 feet to the floor. So the only way we're going to find out if that structure exists down there is to use that same equipment.
Mm-hmm.
And once you prove that there was a facility down there, then you can start to prove some of the stories, because then you can start to question and say, well, if Al Bielek wasn't telling the truth, and if Preston Nichols wasn't telling the truth, then how the hell did they know about this structure? Where did they hear about it from? And what I'm getting at is the contradiction that was in the original book was that Al, Preston, and Duncan Cameron all went to the Memory Motel in town to take a little lunch break to devise a plan that would unleash the monster from the id, like in Forbidden Planet, which was Junior, through Duncan Cameron's imagination, and that he would cause this entire project to fail because he scared everybody. And I portrayed that in my film as well because it's something that they said. However, it's very close to Forbidden Planet in terms of the creature that was created, and so many science fiction films that I saw. But if you get in their heads at the time, perhaps they were trying to tell you the story without telling you about the murders and the kids being kidnapped because they were maybe fearful of what would happen and the repercussions of that. So I'll give them that, and they did say that later. But that would be quite a contradiction, because if you're in this top secret operation, in other words, and you're traveling secretly from Brookhaven Labs to this underground facility, no one with this security that should be there, you would expect to be there, would allow you to go topside without being monitored to go into a motel and devise a plan to destroy this operation underneath the ground. It sounds like a bad movie.
So at what you've got points that are believable and some points that you're just not too sure about.
Sure, and that's fine. You know, when you're open-minded, but at the same time, you know, you don't want to allow someone who might be lying about a situation to just now make that your reality, and you're just going to repeat what they say, especially when their stories are really thin. But when I learned about MK Ultra, which was a U.S. government program, and I learned about Operation Paperclip, which is where the U.S. acquired Nazi scientists after the Nuremberg trials and utilized them for their abilities and their knowledge. And I learned about Holmesburg prison experiments and the Tuskegee medical experiments. Now I'm thinking at that point, okay, this is highly likely to have happened. Now, the boys program, the Montauk Boys program, is highly likely. It's tantamount to a lot of the things that were being done back then in terms of the mind control programs that were happening elsewhere. So why wouldn't have happened at this facility? Now, if we talk about alien technology and time travel experiments, you can ask me, do I believe that stuff is possible? Yes, I believe it's all possible. You know, Lee Spiegel from Huffington Post had told me a story that he was talking to Gordon Cooper, and he was not joking with him when he told him that he may have been part of a time travel experiment, or he was interested at one point. They had mentioned something like that. And why wouldn't these deep military facilities or these factions of the military science try to experiment with just about everything, and probably have so much that we don't know. So I have an open mind to all of that stuff. The thing is, if you can prove that, number one, there's a facility at Montauk, and that that was being used for similar mind control experiments, then I would be open to just about anything that happened there. Which is, it's exhilarating to think because we grew up with all these stories. I think the root of all of us being interested in these things our whole lives is that it's something that should be fiction, but it's not, and that's exhilarating.
Yes.
But the idea that now you have this other level where things are happening that are quite nefarious, people are being murdered and kidnapped for the purpose of developing mind control programs that would eventually be used on us, that's terrifying. That, I hope, is not true.
During your discussions with Preston Nichols and Al Bielek, did either of them explain to you how it was that this God helmet was supposed to function? What it would do?
Yeah, the God helmet itself, there was derivatives of it, according to Preston, being used, the same technology being used underneath the ground in Montauk. The God helmet itself was a design by a doctor named Michael Persinger, who was a financed scientist working in different parts of the U.S. for a while and then eventually Canada, and that's where he passed away. He had several devices called the Haunt Box. I think something was called the Octopus, and then another derivative called the God Helmet. Essentially what they were using was these high amounts of electromagnetic energy, and it would bombard the brain. And the idea behind it, or at least the one he presented partially, was to see if psychic phenomena and phenomena of experiencing a haunting, ghosts, even seeing aliens, could be a result of geomagnetic waves or electromagnetic fields affecting the brain. And he wanted to simulate that in a lab with several different devices and had results. I think he was less trying to say this is a hallucination caused by geomagnetic waves, because he was asked, well, is it possible that these electromagnetic waves are opening up a doorway to consciousness, that you're actually seeing things that could be there? And he said, I haven't ruled it out. And I know that a lot of people are just trying to say that he was trying to say, well, maybe hauntings are all caused by electromagnetic fields. Well, even people in the parapsychology see spikes. Dr. Barry Taff had found those type of electromagnetic spikes in places with a lot of activity. But is it a hallucination? And I think that technology was also being used, if Montauk was real. Preston suggests that was being used as well for similar purposes, and that there's so much to this. I want it to make sense. So, in other words, let's say there were several methods on controlling the brain, one of which was the beatings and the drugs. Another one would be something similar to what Michael Persinger was using, the technology of this high concentrated amount of geomagnetic waves bombarding the brain. If that was being used, let's say there were certain rooms that were charged with it, because in Persinger's case, he did design something called the Haunt Box, which is about the size of a freight elevator, and it was bombarding the subject inside the box with the same stuff. So let's say there were, and this is just all imagination, but if there were rooms at the Montauk facility that were highly charged with this stuff, that might explain, if you were to take Preston Nichols seriously, some of the hallucinations or some of the creatures that he saw. Maybe they weren't real. Maybe they were real in another dimension, or maybe they were just hallucinations caused by this technology that they were experimenting with. I don't know, because again, it's finding this information from subjects. You have these stories. Some of them are less detailed than others, but that doesn't mean the person's lying all the time. It just means sometimes people can't fully articulate their thoughts. They get nervous. You interview people all the time, and doesn't mean they're not telling the truth. It just means they might not be that great at telling you a story. And so I've taken all of this into consideration over the years. And so that's what that technology has said to have done, and there are very real versions of them. I actually have a God helmet in my garage.
Wait, do you use that thing?
No, I will never use it again. I've had lasting effects from it, for sure. And I don't know if they're 100% positive. So
Is this something you have to hook up to your computer?
yes.
Or okay, yikes! Where did you get such a thing?
So
Can you say?
so there were one of Persinger's colleagues that actually sells.
Wow.
Yeah. And so if you could search for it, you can actually purchase one and go through his program. And there are people that claim there are very positive results from this. Personally, my experience with it, I mean, I don't know if you could see this as positive, that there was a while where, I mean, it happens to this day. If I'm at that twilight stage between awake and sleep, immediately I'm in a dream state. Immediately. Very, like, it just go right into it. And I had vivid dreams my entire life, but since I've used the God helmet, they're extremely vivid, and every single time, even if I take a micro nap, I'll have these vivid visions and dreams for sure.
Are they just random dreams, or does there seem to be a focus to them?
Well, one thing I haven't done, which I should do, is keep a dream diary. I believe there's so much to dreams, so much symbology in them that you could reflect on your own life, and you're moving through your consciousness. So I have yet to, in my life, ever really write these things down, but I should. And then I'd probably be able to answer that question better.
Stuart Swedlow had said that the Greys were manufactured species that the government had made from human fetuses that were growing up and being controlled by somebody else. Did you ever come across any more information on that?
Again, when these gentlemen tell those stories, have to question these things. Your imagination can allow an open door for you to say, well, that's possible that the government created something like that. But where is the evidence of it? So I look to either, I think, one of three things: hard evidence, a paper trail mixed in with that, obviously, associative evidence, which would be there were 5 or 6 government programs that are tantamount to what the people said happened at Montauk, and Montauk would have been a great facility for that, and credible witness, someone who has honestly something to lose if their reputation is hurt by an elaborate story. And I'm looking at those things. In Swerdlow's case, I think he says a lot of things that, you know, looking back in hindsight and going through everything, that there are things to consider in the things he says, but there's also, I know things that were fabricated by him for sure. And so I would say be very careful when you're looking into this story, because there are, just like in anything else, just like in ghost stories, just like in cryptozoology, there are profiteers. Now, we all try to profit off of it one way or another. Some of us do our best to try and present the information and the ideas. I think some people say, oh, well, I take this so seriously. It's like, yeah, well, so do I. But I want to give people a good time. I want people to enjoy hearing these stories. I don't want them to walk away depressed, but I certainly want them to have the best possible scenario for them to make a decision too, because I don't like telling people what to think. So I would say just be cautious, because there are a lot of charlatans that surround the supernatural, the paranormal, conspiratorial ideas. And I would be very careful to listen to everything they're saying, especially if there's some kind of guru situation where they're basically telling you, I have all the information to save your life.
Yeah.
With a simple fee of $300 a week, you can be saved. I would say run in the other direction.
When it comes to Stuart Swedlow, with his, you said he may have made some things up.
Oh, yeah.
Something to possibly consider. Maybe it's part of the idea. Daryl Sims, the alien hunter, was telling about how some people will have a hypnotic story placed in their heads. This is what happened. You were not abducted by aliens. And he said then they'll put another hypnotic story on top of that one. So that when the person starts to remember, say they go to a hypnotherapist and, oh, yes, I remember this, and they come up with this elaborate story that's just unbelievable. That may be something that was placed in their heads so that if they did remember and they start telling people, they sound like they're completely crazy and they lose all credibility.
I take great consideration of that. And so, human beings are complicated. So it is also possible that someone could have gone through this, exactly what you just said, that these things were put in their head to make them seem crazy. And Al and Preston did say that to me. So that was a possibility. And I did ask Stuart that as well. And he also said that was a possibility. And what I was referring to before, saying that people are complicated, it doesn't mean that Stuart didn't experience these things. It just means that he's profiting off of these things too. And you can't condemn someone for making a living. However, I think that best practices with this stuff, especially when it's meant to heal people, you have to take great caution. If you're saying I can heal you with my information, take great caution. But after the last couple of years and things that have occurred in the world, I've re-examined my perspective on a lot of what was told to me. Because again, you hear these things and it's like you have to stay sane.
Yes.
When someone tells you there's mind control in everything, in your water and your food and everything, that is setting you up to be a paranoid basket case. You have to take the power away from those things. I've found personally to take the power away from that idea. Because regardless of what's happening, and if there is mass mind control happening in the world, you cannot stop living your life for you, for who you are. First, your family, your loved ones, and your future. You can't give up on that. You have to do your thing every day, because if you get caught up in, everything around me, including the light bulbs, is now trying to control me, that is a poisonous pill to swallow. Very poisonous.
If somebody has not had the opportunity to see your video yet, the Montauk Chronicles, where could they find it?
Well, now I have made it available just about anywhere you look. If you have Tubi, the Tubi app, or you have Plex, you can download either one of those for free and watch Montauk Chronicles for free. Or you can go to my YouTube channel at Garetano7, Garetano number 7, and Montauk Chronicles is on there with an intro by myself. It is available on Apple TV and Prime, but they're charging money to own it. And you can also order it from Amazon on DVD or Blu-ray. But if you want to watch it for free with commercial breaks, you can download the Tubi app, and it is on there. Or on YouTube.
Yeah, I think it's on YouTube. I believe that's where I watched it. And
it's on my channel.
Okay, yeah, that's where I saw the thing. How about DVDs or anything like that?
Sure, you can just order the DVDs on Amazon, Blu-ray and DVD, and there's some extras on there that are not available anywhere else. And I've made it available, and it's really caught on. A lot of people are watching it now more than ever, it seems. I kept it very close to the chest, and you could only get it through my website for years, ordering the DVD or Blu-ray. But now I've made it available for everyone.
Now on a slightly different slant, your podcast, Off to the Witch.
Yes.
Where did you come up with that name?
Well, I was listening to a Ronnie James Dio song called Last in Line. And I think the first line in the song is, "We're off to the witch." I always thought about, since I was a kid, what that meant. And I think it means we're about to walk into the unknown. We're somewhere on the edge, somewhere where the abnormal happens. So I thought it would be a great name for not only the podcast, but a variety of things with that label. My new specials, one feature-length documentaries, are also called Off to the Witch Presents, and then it has its own title. And I have been writing a movie called Off to the Witch that has all of these themes in a fictitious story as well. I love that idea that it has several identities. So I felt I would go with that for a while.
I got my title from Marlon Williams' song called Strange Things, and I reached out to him trying to get the song as my intro music, but fortunately that didn't happen because YouTube has gotten so crazy about their music that they're telling people that own the copyrights they have to prove that they own the music. So
yeah, it happened with Montauk Chronicles when I uploaded it to YouTube because there was a Russian television that stole scenes from my movie and claimed they owned my movie. And it took a while, but it was proven, and they had their video taken down, which already had 1 million hits on it.
that's just not right. What was your first podcast, The End of Summer in the Twilight Zone?
Yes.
That was fantastic. I was amazed considering this was your first podcast, but then you've got training and other things that are similar. Could you tell the listeners about that one?
So that particular episode was an interview with Edwin Neal, who played the hitchhiker in the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Now, I open up with a story about Rod Serling. A lot of people don't know that Rod Serling was a combat veteran, and what he went through during that time, post-traumatic stress, coming home, and then pouring that into the immortal Twilight Zone series. No one's ever going to beat that series. Greatest television series ever made, in my opinion. So Edwin Neal had a very similar story. He fought in Vietnam. He went through trauma, comes home, and plays, once again, and it's not the Twilight Zone, but it's one of the most terrifying movies ever made, and probably the most terrifying character in horror of the 70s, in my opinion, was the character he played. He played a paranoid, schizophrenic murderer in an isolated farmhouse in Texas, the hitchhiker. And Ed just gave quite a performance, and he tells about his time in Vietnam, talks about how you translate that pain and that trauma into an artistic endeavor, like a role in a film that's as immortal as the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Such a great story, and he's a great storyteller, Edwin Neal.
Oh yeah, if anybody hasn't listened to it, they should as soon as possible go to Off to the Witch and just scroll down to the very first podcast, and there it is, End of Summer in the Twilight Zone. Just an amazing interview.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, we have a variety of topics, things I'm interested in, and people I think that will tell a good story.
How do you come up with your subject for the week? Do you have an idea on which direction you want to go, or do you just sit there in a dark room like I do and hope something pops into your mind?
A little bit of both. I recorded a few interviews when I revived because the podcast I put on hiatus for a while. I was shooting these feature documentaries, these new ones that are coming, and then I came back, and I'm doing it every week now. I just really wanted to dive into things that I love, just like you. These are things that I love, and ideas that are interesting to me. And so, yeah, I meditate on it for a minute. I love magic, stories of the occult, people that got involved. One interview, it's a 2-part interview with Stanton LaVey. He's the grandson of Anton LaVey, the creator of modern Satanism. And what I found interesting about Stanton is that he grew up in that house, the Black House in San Francisco. He'll give us a perspective like nobody has. He was a kid in that house, and he did. He told a great story. And his life coming back and forth and spending time with his grandpa. Anton LaVey was his grandpa. Now we get to see Anton LaVey as someone's grandfather. And we can dissipate the character he played a lot of the time, and he is grandpa. He's that guy, but he's a unique grandfather. And that's, I think, what I wanted to open the door for the audience is to dissipate some of the myths around the guy, because the minute someone hears the word Satanism, they're thinking evil, horrible, murderer. Yet they'll talk about serial killers day in, day out, and that's not what Anton LaVey was. He was more of a showman. He had his own way. He was a rebel, but he loved vintage movies and sideshows. He was a carny, a magician. He loved women. It's such a great story. So I wanted to get it from the perspective of someone that knew him well and wasn't judgmental of his grandfather, and that's what I got. So.
Wow. I'll have to listen to that one soon. I ran out of time before I ran out of podcasts. The last one, The Legend of Paul Nathan Fagan, he was the one that you said he died recently?
Yeah. Now, that was, to answer your question again, that was last minute because I did not know Paul was, and I don't really know what happened to him, and I'm not that voyeuristic to ask his family specifically. I just know he's gone. And he was a young guy, and he passed away. And I wanted to, while it was still, fresh in my mind, I wanted to pay tribute to him because he really did contribute to my movie.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, boy, I think we lost connection.
No? Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me? What the heck happened?
We get it back.
How about now? Can you hear me? Modern technology is great until it stops working.
Hey, Chris, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Oh, I think we're back, finally.
After the beep. I will consider editing that piece out, or I just might leave it in there because I hate editing, because when you chop a interview into pieces, it can sound like you're rearranging what the person is talking about. Sure. I don't like that subject, so I'll just cut that out of there. It happened to Bob Gimlin from the Patterson-Gimlin film. Mm-hmm. He was interviewed on the radio. The guy recorded the interview, and then he chopped it up in little pieces and he put it back together to where Bob Gimlin was saying that he believed that Roger Patterson had faked the thing.
Oh, wow. Wow.
Upset. And that may have been why he didn't do any interviews for years afterwards.
Yeah, you have to be careful. I've had journalists do that to me here and there, where they completely, they'll listen on the phone or they record it, and then they transcribe it, and it's something that I did not say.
Yeah.
But it happens. But I understand.
I'll probably just leave that little glitch in there. What I was thinking, though, was this Paul Fagan spent a lot of time running around Camp Hero in some of the underground tunnels.
He did, yeah. Well, some of them were open originally. Mm-hmm. They've been filled in since. And Paul spent so much time there. He was, believe it or not, he was inspired by the motion picture 1985 Richard Donner, Steven Spielberg movie, The Goonies. He was a kid. And so he sees this movie and he's like, well, it kind of looks like the Pacific coast a little bit with the cliffs, the rocky cliffs and Montauk Point. And I'm on the ocean and there's this mystery in town. And that's what made him want to do it. That's the kind of thing that makes us all want to do this. And some people later on deny it and just say, well, I'm a serious researcher. I'm like, what does that even mean? You're so serious. You just look really hard at the wall while you're thinking about it. It's like, yeah, we're all serious. Otherwise, we wouldn't put any time into it. But at the end of the day, I think it's the mysteries that we love. And for me, it's less about solving the mystery and more about the adventure, the journey of it, the idea, reading about it. I'm interested in that. The stories,
I'm wondering if perhaps he picked something up while he was down in those tunnels, some discarded thing that the government left behind that may have had a physical effect on him.
It could be. I knew that would be considered, and Paul was talking about that. One of the things Paul told me was that he stumbled across a bunch of barrels that had a strange substance coming out of them. It sounds like a story, but there's stuff that supports this because he saw all the barrels lined up. He was trying to get information off of them, and there's some really weird stuff coming out of them. And then a little bit later, Paul said that they had a truck in there and they were digging, Parks Department guys, and they were burying all of these barrels. Now, what was in those barrels, I don't know. where they were coming from, why they were being disposed of. There's a lot of weird stuff that I actually witnessed and heard about out there too. For instance, the same geophysicists that use the electric resistivity imagery were also using ground penetrating radar when we were in another patch of land. And Mike from GeoView, which is a Florida-based company that came out to New York for the History Channel special, said that they found decomposing patches that were similar to unmarked grave sites that decomposing organic material is what he recognized that was similar to other potter's fields or unmarked graves. Now, who was being buried out there? Could that have been, a bunch of saplings that were buried, or if it was a Native American graveyard that was disregarded, or it could have been a bunch of Montauk boys. We don't know, because it would have had to have been an entirely new production in general to have brought police out there, get people to excavate the graves and check it out and see what's over there. But there's definitely a true mystery out in Camp Hero for sure. And Paul was someone that knew that. There were story after story that comes from there. And part of me believes that it's only begun. This will continue on. And eventually someone's going to prove that there really is a full base underneath there. Because if what we found on the vertical slice is there, I'm just doing simple arithmetic to estimate that there's much more to see,
Are you working on anything upcoming that you can talk about?
Sure. There's the first Off to the Witch Presents feature-length docu-special. It's I don't want to call it investigative. It's more an exploratory thing. I'm in it like my show Strange World, but it's not a show in that sense. It's unique, and it talks about all of the things that inspire us to be interested in the afterlife through story, ghost stories, horror films, all of those things I grew up with. And at its center, there are two haunted locations that I wanted to approach quite differently. One of which is the home of my brother in Tampa, Florida, and the other is a famous haunted mansion called the May Stringer House. And I examined each of these situations. At my brother's place, I wanted to try something. There was a gentleman that passed away there. It's on record that he died before him and my sister-in-law had purchased the house. And he slipped and fell in the bathroom, hit his head. He was, he was kind of a recluse, lived alone, and he panicked. He was bleeding all over the place and couldn't get himself together to make a phone call or get an ambulance, and ended up falling down in the hallway and expiring on the floor in the house. They have since experienced quite a bit of activity in that house, ranging from doors shaking in the middle of the night to literally hearing someone right behind your ear. And both my sister-in-law and my brother are not storytellers in that sense. They were a little apprehensive about even letting me come in, but I wanted to try something different. So I hired an actor as I was going to shoot the recreations for this gentleman expiring and passing away. But I wanted the actor to be open and receptive to the idea that maybe he'll feel something in the house. If we go to each of the locations where he was injured, through the hallway, and where he died, I'm going to, I told him, you're going to be lying down on the exact spot where he expired. And creating this as a catalyst to maybe amp up some activity. Go through the whole thing. Have him dressed as the man. Have him going through it. If there's a spirit there that would react to this. And then we had a traditional trance medium in the house and did a seance. And this is not portrayed, no offense to these shows, but not like Ghost Hunters or Ghost Adventures or anything like that. This is very different. And I think it's going to be a treat for people who want a fresh perspective on something that we've enjoyed and we've read about and we're all familiar with, which is hauntings and Halloween and horror films. But I wanted to give a fresh perspective, because I think a lot of these ideas, everything ranging from the North American Sasquatch to a haunted house, haven't been portrayed very well, and especially in modern paranormal shows. It seems to be so repetitive, and it seems to be the same thing every episode. And I happen to know, because I've worked with networks that a lot of these shows are faked. I'm not saying hauntings are faked or fake, but a lot of these shows are faked for a schedule. And I think if I'm going to reapproach something that is quote unquote done to death, I want to do it right. And for me, what was done right were the books that were written that I read when I was a kid. Leonard Nimoy's stuff, even though it's older portrayals, the recreations were different. They were shot on 16 millimeter film. They didn't have what we have today. So I wanted to create something fresh with tried and true ideas behind it in terms of its portrayal. And I want to deliver to the audience. I want to give them something amazing. So I'm working really hard to do that. And of course, we have some really original programs coming up. And but yeah, it's a whole series called Off to the Witch Presents. It's basically my new version of Strange World, which was my series I did for Discovery and Travel.
Fantastic. So anybody that wants to listen to some very good podcasts, just search for Off to the Witch and you'll be amazed. One thing I must say about the movie Montauk Chronicles, you might not want real young kids watching it until you've seen it yourself, because there are some scenes in there that might put them off a bit.
It's out there, and it definitely will. The idea was I wanted to try and bring you into that moment of trauma and feel that heaviness without completely sending you in the other direction. And at the time, that's what I decided to do. But like I said, referring back to this Netflix series about Jeffrey Dahmer, oh boy, I mean that's a heavy thing,
It's, I guess what's happening is people want to impact their watching audience, and people have been so blanketed with ghosts and UFOs and things that they're trying to reach that next level. And so it's like, hey, I know. And so they just make it a little darker and a little deeper and a little harder to deal with once you watched it.
Yeah, see, my approach, like I'll definitely do something on UFOs, but I'd probably go back, because to me right now, the UFO phenomena is as mysterious as it's ever been. You have these group of people that are on this chase to try and find out exactly what it is, and I'm going to prove it. It's like, you're not going to prove anything. And I guarantee you right now that you're going to be surprised in the next few years what's revealed to all of us collectively about these things that are flying around. People are going to be shocked, and that's exciting, but it's also terrifying, because this is something not of our world, and anything could happen. So my portrayal of them in, let's say, a forthcoming special would be more like it was when I was a kid, where it was so terrifying at times and mysterious that there would be something out there in space watching us. And you start with that basic premise and tapping back into the feeling that I had as a kid, because there was just this endless sense of mystery about it. Whereas I think a lot of the portrayals today seem more like a sport, like, oh, we're going to get it, we're going to catch it, we're going to get it. And then they build you up for the commercial break. And in my opinion, these shows never deliver. They keep repeating the same things we're seeing on the news, which is that footage of, the Pentagon released. Yeah, the same thing over and over and over again. So they're not doing anything new. They're not doing anything to elevate the situation. Some of these people are, because they were pushing for more evidence, and it seems like that evidence is being revealed because there was a request. I'm not putting down people who are trying to find out what these things are. For myself, as someone who works in the medium of movies and TV, I am not excited about seeing what's being made in my realm, So if you're just about releasing evidence and doing interviews about talking about that evidence that you found, that's a different thing than I'm talking about. I'm saying when I portray it to you, either in cinema or in a documentary form, I'm going to push to give you something completely different. Otherwise, I have no interest whatsoever in repeating what I keep seeing on television.
Real quick, could you give us just a slight rundown on South Texas Blues?
So that is something that I've worked on for a very long time. I wrote the screenplay finished it in '06, and then I have revised it since. And the new revised version I'll probably be putting out in paperback because I just got hired to direct a movie by a good group of people, and they're interested in it now. And it is, from my research, from speaking to many people and reading archived interviews and watching every documentary that is available to give the information, listening to commentaries, but a lot of it was firsthand in the beginning, the making of the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. What happened? And it's a story written, it's a unique perspective, written from the world of Tobe Hooper, the director. He was the only one I think you could truly tell this entire story, if in terms of perspective, through, because he was there throughout the entire process, and in the end, it was his passion. So whereas a lot of these biopics end with a big premiere and everyone's having a great time, it ends with Tobe cutting the movie alone on a Steenbeck in his kitchen, because that's what he was doing. And camera's moving to his back is turned to the camera, and it fades out, because we don't, that's the life of an independent filmmaker. We don't know what's going to happen. You don't know, you sit there and put all this passion into this thing that could have just been thrown away at a drive-in or whatever, and it ended up becoming an immortal piece of cinema that's in high regard, you know.
You're going to get Edward Neal to throw in a word or two?
Oh, Ed's known about this for a long time. You know, he definitely wants to be part of it one way or another, for sure.
I'll have to get a copy of that book as soon as it comes out then.
Yeah, I'll send you one for sure. I appreciate it. Yeah, I can always send you the in PDF, but I'd rather you have the hard copy. I'm sure I like hard copies of things.
I have a few books on my shelves here, a few thousand.
Anything
Anything
series too. Hold on. I see this one.
Yes, I've got that.
Yeah.
Buy one, or pay for it each month, I think it was, and then they ship you the next one, and you pay for the shipping. And then they say, "Hell, how'd you like to have the whole batch at one time?" That's what I did.
Another great one was The Enchanted World. Do you remember that one?
No, that one slips my mind, but then a lot of things slip my mind these days.
It was early '80s. Great series. I have it here too.
Well, anything you'd like to say before I let you get back to your life?
Yeah, I've been writing a novel called Montauk Boys, and it's fiction, but it's based on all of the people I spoke to that claim they were part of this project. And originally, I was talking to some MTV-affiliated people that were very serious about turning it into a TV show, and there were discussions on and off about it for a while, and they optioned my script. But after 2020, I decided, you know, I didn't want it to go through anyone else's filter, because there really is a strong story here that I want to tell purely. So I'm going to release it as a work of fiction, a novel, and it'll have some illustrations in it, like, you know, Stephen King's The Stand did, and then eventually probably turn it into a motion picture. But that's something I did want to mention, because I've been working on it for a while, and I'll release the novel next year at some point. So for anyone's interested in my perspective on Montauk through this type of lens, you know, this is something definitely I'm excited about.
Fantastic. Well, I'll let you get back to your life then. This has been Christopher Garetano on Strange Things with Chris James.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man, this same murder 3? Strange things that happen here, how stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?